Rosalyn, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. This is, I think, the second podcast that we've done together over the last couple of years. However, you're a thought leader, an inspirational
Yeah.
leader on certainly on LinkedIn, and folks are just really. I think people love you. They just gravitate towards you. Everyone I talk to really loves you, and I love you. Like I talk to you, and I
Thank
feel
you.
like we've been friends for 30 years or something. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. And yeah, thank you for the kind introduction as well. I mean, I'm happy to be here. Always great to chat with you, George. When you reached out, I'm like, yeah, definitely, let's do it. And it was
Thank
a lot
you.
of fun the last time, and I'm excited to chat with you again today.
Awesome. Well, you have that energy that that just makes you feel at home. So I always
Thank
enjoy
you.
it. Well, why don't we dig in real quick into like the topic of RevOps? What for the folks out there who don't know, what is RevOps?
Yeah. There's been so many different definitions, I think, and lots of confusion. Of course, I think we've definitely come a long way in the last couple of years in terms of what is it and what isn't it, or what it isn't. My personal definition, sort of revenue operations, I think of it as really that infrastructure to support your end-to-end revenue process, right? So that's all of your go-to-market organization in terms of supporting the customer. So you think about customer life cycle from top of funnel through becoming a prospect, becoming a customer, and especially in SaaS, becoming that repeat customer and ongoing customer who stays with you and also expands and grows with you. So when I think about infrastructure, I think of, people, process, and technology, of course, but also data and insights, enablement, as well as strategy. So if you think about all of the sort of the plumbing, if you will, to support everything revenue related, whether that's driving net new revenue or driving retention, really supporting all of that from a customer perspective.
I love the plumbing analogy because, especially over the last, let's just call it decade, all these tools have come up, right? And we have to bring those together. We have to be able to sync those properly, and just not the technology infrastructure, but as you mentioned, the people and the process pieces as well. So that's awesome. Now, if you're an organization out there and you're really trying to think about how do I, first of all, like when should I start to invest in a dedicated RevOps team? How do I start to know that it's time to do that?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think it's, there's probably not a kind of one size fits all for this, but I definitely think the earlier you start, the better, right? And that doesn't mean that you need a full blown revenue operations team. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need like a, VP of revenue operations or 20 people on the team. But what it does mean is that you need to start thinking about your business from an operational perspective, right? If you think about as soon as, early stage companies, you have product market fit, you're starting to maybe bring on some customers, it's probably time to bring on some type of operational infrastructure, right? And again, it doesn't have to be a full-blown team, but start to be able to build some of that plumbing, right, that we're talking about, but also be able to build some of those processes that are, of course, going to be iterative and they're going to change over time, but just so you can start having some repeatability, but also an eye on sort of the insights in terms of what's working in your business. Because even if you only have a couple of customers, you want to dig in and understand why, right? What's making them successful? What's making them stay? How are they using your product, right? And really understand some of that information so that you can leverage that data to be able to make, better decisions moving forward. I think a lot of companies make the mistake of doing it really late, bringing in sort of that insights and data and even strategy or process, all of these different things. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to have a full-blown shop, but you need to start putting some of that in place. They make the mistake of not doing that soon enough. And what happens is they get to a point where they just have no idea what's working and what's not. They don't know, what type of, who their ICP is, right? Who their customers are any of their assumptions even correct. And they also don't know how to scale the team, right? As soon as your founder is no longer your primary seller, it's probably time to have some operational rigor, right? And some operational infrastructure.
You mentioned just really being able to dig into the data. And I was chatting with a product marketer on the show, actually, probably about an hour ago or so. And he kept digging into win-loss assessments, right? And like that being a function that as a product marketer, he really recommended that we dig into. And it sounds like a great stakeholder to work with is that RevOps professional.
Yeah, 100%, right? Because you have those subject matter experts, right? Like your product marketer, or maybe your head of sales, or, your, customer success person, if you have that already, if you're at that point in your organization. But then to have that RevOps person partner with you to get the systems ready for you, right? Make sure your process is in place, and then getting those insights, like you said, kind of what's working, what's not. I mean, win-loss reporting is a great example of blind spots, right? How many organizations you talk to and they're like, yeah, we have a win rate and we know we lose deals, but they have no idea what is driving, right, some of that, and then what to actually do to improve win rates, right? And really understand why they're winning and why they're losing, and then how to actually, pivot and make adjustments to improve those numbers.
For the product marketers that listen to the show, this is a really, really powerful kind of clip here, right, to think about, or section of the conversation, because a lot of product marketers specifically are trying to figure out, how do I uncover those insights? So partner with RevOps, take them out to lunch, buy them a drink, and then you get that, that direct line to I think a really valuable piece of information, right? That's going to help with all their jobs to be done.
Definitely. And I think you raised a good point about the insights, because I think from an operations perspective, sales is typically, they're used to having sales operations really involved in forecasting and deal management and some of the information there. But I think a lot of times in marketing, they miss out on an opportunity by not leveraging their operations team enough. Right. Oftentimes they think about operations as, the people who run the marketing automation, whether that's Pardot or Marketo or HubSpot. And they're the folks that kind of run campaign operations to support that. But they don't leverage their ops enough for those insights, the data, aligning with them on the strategy on what they're trying to actually launch, and be able to leverage them to figure out what's working and what's not. And be better partners with your sales team as well.
Yeah. Well, because you know how it is. A lot of the time sales reps are a bit guarded with their customers. And so I think that's why a lot of these sort of supporting roles are trying to get access to these insights. But then I get it. Like, I've been a salesperson before, right? You don't want your product marketer or sometimes prematurely CS come in. And the same thing for CS, right? When they're owning the relationship after the sale. Well, let's dig in a little bit into the components of a RevOps framework. What are those? I know that's a big question and it would take a couple hours to really dig in deep, but at a high level, for folks who are trying to kind of figure out what that framework might be, how they could start to approach it, the different sort of sections, or, if they had a checklist, it's these that I really got to dig into as a high priority.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, if you think about sort of those people, process, tech, right, data and insights, enablement and strategy, I think of those as sort of the large pillars of revenue operations, right? And this is, when we talk about data and insights, we're talking about holistically across the entire, funnel end to end, right? When we're talking about technology and the systems, we're talking about not just a piece of the funnel or a piece of those technologies, but really that holistic view across them. So if you think about, that's your overall arching pillars of your overall revenue operations framework, but where do you dig in first, right? And I think that really depends on a lot on your size and stage of your company and where you're at, but also, the complexity of your selling motion and who you actually sell to, right? Because you can't, we'd all love to have unlimited resources and be able to fully staff all of those in a very comprehensive and dynamic way. But the reality is that a lot of these earlier stage companies, you're talking about one person trying to do all of this. Maybe if you're lucky, you have a generalist and maybe a CRM, Salesforce admin, for example. But so you're asking them to do a lot. So when you build out that framework, you can think about, what do you need short term, right? What are those most critical needs that operations can help to address in order to, hit your short term goals? But then you want to build out that from your framework perspective, your longer term project plan, right? Like, what is the next, what is the end goal look like? But then you want to work out that plan in terms of, okay, today, this is where I really need insights. I need, some of that enablement maybe because we're hiring a ton of reps, for example. And then you want to lean in there, but you want to know, okay, my next hire is going to be what, right? 2 months down the road, 3 months down the road, or even a year down the road, and have a framework and a project plan. I always like to call it the kind of a RevOps roadmap, if you will, in terms of what that's going to look like. And then you can start to work towards that because, again, you don't have, there's no unlimited resources, unfortunately. So you have to leverage, what you have, but also the strength of your bench, right? I think about your finance team, or maybe if you have somebody in IT, or even sales leaders, SEs. There's different people within the organization that are doing pieces of operations a lot of times if you don't have a dedicated RevOps, function.
Even some sales managers, right? Who are a little more savvy. That get in there. I've always set up, every time I was a sales manager or sales leader within an organization, I ended up, I was always at really small startups. So I ended up being sales ops as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that kind of goes back to that question about, when to hire operations, because I think at some point you no longer want your head of sales, right? Like you no longer want George to be managing the CRM, right? Or that you're managing the sales engagement platform, for example. You want, your head of sales to go focus on talking to customers and actually closing deals. So you want that operational counterpart to come in and, again, manage sort of that infrastructure to support your team.
When you said that, I was like, I don't know if you want George managing your sales team anyways these days. He'd have them doing meditation and mantras, just who I am right now.
Which isn't a bad thing.
I guess so. I just think about, those times that I reference. I was just like, just hammering sales. But it's got to be sustainable, right? For long periods of time. But, let's talk a little bit about, bridging the gap. Maybe we can, double click on bridging the gap between sales and marketing using RevOps. What are some of the things that come to mind that maybe you can give some advice to folks out there around?
Yeah, 100%. I think operations, one of the biggest, kind of promotional material for ops, right, is really having that holistic view of the business, right? We talk a lot about silos, right? Marketing kind of doing their own thing. Sales does their own thing. I mean, it's pretty classic in terms of, marketing is generating all these leads and sales says, oh, these are really poor leads and, we can't use any of them. And then marketing says, oh, sales isn't working on the leads we're bringing, right? It's very sort of cliche almost, but it's very stereotypical of sort of those silos that happen. And although I think most organizations have moved hopefully away from that level of silo, but at the same time, having, really leveraging revenue operations to be that function that steps back and takes a look across the funnel, again, from a customer perspective, right? Putting the customer in the middle. And being able to align these teams in terms of what is marketing working on and how does that feed into what sales is doing, and tying those together through, from a practical perspective, is even aligning them on the strategy, right? Making sure that everyone's talking the same language. They're looking at, not only strategy the same way, but their objectives, right? It doesn't mean that marketing and sales has to have the same objectives, but their objectives should all be tied in some way based upon their roles and responsibilities, tied back to the overall go-to-market goals and the corporate goals, right? If you think about, trying to drive net new revenue, right? Everybody wants that, but everyone plays a role in it because, everybody plays a role in it, but they have to understand not only their role, but how their role impacts what happens either downstream or how they get impacted upstream.
Yeah. Why is this so difficult, Rosalyn? Like it's so, I mean, for me, on paper, right, it's like, okay, 1 + 1 = 2. I got to pass a baton to you in a relay race, right?
Yeah.
Like it seems so logical, yet
it's so difficult.
And the only thing that can come to mind for me when I think about this over and over again, and, my experiences, I won't name any companies, but it's generally happened that 98% of the companies I've ever been at, and maybe that 2%, it was just swept under the rug. is the human component, right? Like we can't get
Yes.
along, or like there's some misalignment with incentives. So, the human is now nervous about doing something that is not aligned with their KPIs or their OKRs or their goals, and so that ends up breaking the alignment. Like, I don't know.
Yes.
That's what it seems like to me. In your experience, what is it?
Yeah, no, I think that is part of the reason is misalignment in terms of incentives for sure. I've seen that 100 times, right? In terms of just misalignment in the goals, but also that transparency, right? I think you mentioned earlier when we were talking about how in sales, you kind of don't want to let product marketing know what's happening or let some of these teams in sooner. And so I really look at revenue operations as that body that drives transparency, right? Drives that visibility across the teams. It's about sharing information, right? Making sure that everybody's on the same page. So when you think about what marketing's working on, and it's not just, it's not just kind of looking upstream and downstream, but it's really about kind of that team sport, right? Because you mentioned sort of in the past, it used to be very much like a baton race, right? Marketing does their piece, they hand it off to sales, they hand it off. But in SaaS, it's not a baton race, right? It's really like, I always give this analogy of it's much more like soccer, right? Like a football game, like football and other places in the US, we call it soccer, but really soccer because everyone's sort of passing the ball back and forth and everybody stays engaged, right, within the team. That's marketing and sales, but also customer success, support, finance, right, product, even your legal team, your HR team. Everyone should be involved who touches the customer because it really is about that kind of passing it back and forth and everyone staying in the game, which means that everyone has an eye on what's happening in the business. They all have a specific, role and they have responsibilities within that game, but everyone plays a part.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of that is just, a lot of those silos come from just lack of transparency, right? Lack of visibility and, sort of that fear of not wanting to share information. But I think of RevOps as just kind of cracking that wide open and making sure everyone sees everything and is looking at it the same way. And because that's the only way you're going to be able to actually implement, or impact growth and impact scalability.
And is that something that you think starts at the top? I guess, everyone would probably say yes, but how do we get the individual
Teams,
stakeholders to care, right? Because a lot of it is about caring and reaching that extra inch, I think, no?
Yeah, for sure. I think, it always helps when you have buy-in at the top, right? When you have leadership, but even if your CEO and your founder and your executive team is saying the words and talking about transparency, you still need to make it actionable for people. Yeah. And I think that's where RevOps comes in. I know at the last company I worked in, I was really hired to bring RevOps together, right? We had exactly that: marketing ops, we had sales ops, everybody rolling into their own. We had a CS ops that rolled into the customer officer. And none of the teams were talking to each other. And I just thought like, wow, this is really crazy because how are you getting your work done, right? If you don't even have communicate, you don't have regular ongoing, you don't have a cadence of regular meetings, you don't share and look at the same information, you don't share what each other's goals are and what what's important to you in terms of your strategy. So, me coming in was really like a selling cycle. I came in almost like a roadshow. The first 30 days was literally going around meeting with all of the stakeholders, helping them understand, what is RevOps? Why do you need it? Right? Why now? And trying to explain to them sort of the benefits and explain that the ways that they're doing things, how they could be so much better if we just did, these couple of different things. And then just start bringing people together in different meetings, sharing information, and just it's a gradual it's a process, right? It's not something that can happen necessarily overnight because people have to trust, right? It's that people element. They have to be open and willing to not only share what's working, what's not in their organizations and share some of those things that they need help with, but also be able to trust each other with that information and come with the best intentions, right? But I think aligning the goals is really key. Right. You mentioned about everyone having different goals and different incentives. That's probably the number one deal breaker, right? That breaks these things into silos is folks not thinking about the same bigger picture and working towards the same goals.
If there were some KPIs, let's say one KPI that if you're starting off implementing a RevOps team and you have to probably put a couple together, but if there was one that you would say, this is going to be the top one that I'm going to start off with, because you can't do everything under the sun, especially early
Yeah.
on, what would that KPI be?
Yeah, I think for the overall company, when I guess two parts. I think one, from a RevOps perspective around your own KPIs, right? So like my own KPIs, for example, for RevOps leader, it's always difficult. This is one of the questions I get a lot from other RevOps professionals is, we do so much work. We know we make an impact to the overall business, but we can't demonstrate it, right? Because some of the things we do are very like behind the scenes, back office type of things. And I tell people, it's like, even if you're rolling out something as simple as a new fields in the CRM, right? Seems pretty tactical and pretty small, but why are you doing them, right? Like, how does that tie back to the overall go-to-market goals, right? Maybe it is better forecast accuracy, for example, but you're creating these fields that now are going to capture certain pieces of the funnel that will enable you to have better predictability around your forecast, right? I said, even if it's like 5 steps away, but you should always tie back to the high level goals. And that's how you can measure and say, okay, when I had this process in place, here was my forecast accuracy. Now that I've implemented these fields with this process and enabled the team, of course, and communicated and drove adoption to that, now I've improved forecast accuracy by X, right? And it's not that particular action did it in a silo, right? Because there's other factors that contribute to that success rate, but at least you can tie back to it and be able to measure. And so I think about whatever those top level goals are for your go-to-market, net new revenue, retention, customer satisfaction, kind of those typical ones that, you and I always, probably everyone talks about all the time, conversion, right? All the different conversion rates and such. Thinking about those and tying everything you do from an ops perspective back to those goals is really, really important, because it's so easy to just have a list of 20 things to go work on those things and feel like you didn't make any impact to the business, or at least not have the visibility to that. It's different from a salesperson winning a deal. Everyone knows, right? We close one and everyone hits the gong and everybody celebrates. But all the things that you're doing kind of in the back end in terms of infrastructure to support that is not always as easy, to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you think about trends or any notable trends out there, or if you have an opinion on the future of RevOps, particularly, of course, in our B2B SaaS space, anything that really stands out you're excited about? Of course, AI is all over the place this year,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think I have a love-hate relationship with AI right now. But I think from a trends perspective, and I think you and I were touching on this a little bit, is I do think that we'll continue to see, from a technology perspective, consolidation, right? We're going to continue to see that because one, obviously everybody's trying to cut costs and trying to, save some money, but also the amount of time and resources it takes to not only implement a new technology, but also to administer and manage it and configure it and train everybody on it and keep it running properly. All of those are costs, right? From a time and resource perspective, as well as a monetary perspective. So I think we're going to continue to see a lot of consolidation and more of this, less point solutions and a lot more platform solutions. And I think, we were just talking about it, but we're already seeing it, right? You're seeing a lot of the big players that are really good at one part of the funnel now really expanding into other pieces, because everyone wants to be the RevOps platform, right? We keep hearing that. And every time I hear that, I'm like, okay, well, tell me which part of the funnel you really are good at, right? But everyone's touting themselves as the RevOps platform.
Yeah, well, congrats to Clary for their acquisition today of Groove, and it's an exciting time to be in that space. It's highly competitive, of course, but congratulations to those folks for sure.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, definitely. And I think we'll just continue to see that consolidation. And I think from an AI perspective, I get asked this question a lot with earlier stage companies thinking about how they leverage AI. And I think about from an ops perspective, it's that you really want to leverage AI to do the things that a human, either can't do or it takes them hours and hours to do. right? At least from a RevOps perspective, right? Those really deep analytics and insights that we're trying to get to, sometimes it takes a human hours, right? We dump all this data into like an Excel or a Google sheet and have to, slice and dice it a million ways to go figure out what we're looking for, versus if we can leverage AI to, bubble up some of that information and tell us where we should be focused. I think that will save us a lot of time and also allow us to be much more strategic and less tactical.
Awesome. Well, let's talk here as we wrap up about the RevOps Collective, and tell folks a little bit about what that organization is. You've been doing this for a long time. You are RevOps. Like, I don't know anybody else that exemplifies it and knows more than you. And so just if we could tell folks a little bit about your organization, and then if you wanted to become a member, what could they expect to experience?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple of different components for the RevOps Collective, primarily, obviously consulting for organizations around, how to set up their RevOps, how to build, scale, and grow it, and oftentimes how to fix it, right? So some of the problems that, you and I've been talking about, those are real problems that organizations face that, again, RevOps can, come in. It's not a silver bullet or, anything like that. It is hard work to go do, but it is possible to get there. The other piece is sort of that I'm working on that I'm really excited about is the coaching. So, we've been talking about sort of this rise of revenue operations and all of these great roles for ops professionals, and they're being thrown into these roles that are growth roles for sure, which is great for their career, but also they're being asked to do a lot without a lot of necessarily the right guidance or resources and support. So the one-on-one coaching that I've been doing is really an opportunity for me to share some of my experience, lessons learned, mistakes made, some of the hard knocks, right, from just doing the work and being in the trenches. So hoping that, others can leverage some of those learnings to really skip some steps and hopefully accelerate their careers and do a little bit more, accelerate faster and get more done faster for their organizations. And then the last piece is community, which is what you mentioned. And really, there's tons of great communities, as you and I know. We belong to tons of them. There's a lot of really good ones that I belong to. But a lot of times I get asked, like, well, where's the best place for me to just learn about revenue operations and be a better operator? And so I really wanted to create a small community. It's not meant to be thousands and thousands of people, but it's a place where we can, as ops professionals, get together and really have good conversations about relevant topics and then learn from each other. Selfishly, it's a place for me to do a bit of a brain dump also on just, experience in some of the playbooks, frameworks, and things like that I've done in the past. And then also for them to really build network connections and build their own, group of trusted advisors that they can lean on and, hopefully help each other.
Awesome. Rosalyn, thank you so much for being on the show. If folks want to learn more about what you're doing, maybe, become a member of the RevOps Collective or hire you for consulting, what are the best channels to reach you?
Yeah, definitely. Go to the website, go to the RevOpsCollective.com, book some time with me, free consult, book some time with me, send a contact us form. I can email me or connect with me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, have a wonderful day and congrats on the move as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.